7, Unit 1, Lesson 4, Part 2, Multiplying Integers, the notes. So today we're going to be able to multiply integers by hand, model integer multiplication, and explain the sign rules. Sign rules are really important. And model and solve situation problems and interpret solutions in context. So a couple of vocabulary words. First, factor. Factor is a number that is multiplied, and product is a group of factors multiplied together or the result of multiplication. So the example here, 3 times 5 is 15. Okay, that is true. 3 and 5 are the factors. 15 is the product of 3 and 5, and product also refers to 3 times 5 is 15 written as a product of two integers. So product refers to both the answer and the expression written as things being multiplied together. For the most part, you will just think of it as meaning the answer. In 8th grade, we'll do a little bit with writing things as products. For example, you can write 4 as a product of 2 and 2. Okay, on the number line thing, these are already done. You can fill them out in your notes. Number line model of multiplication. In the number line model, positive integers are represented as arrows pointing to the right. Negative integers point to the left. Multiplication is repeated addition, so to multiply by a positive, you start at 0 and move the first factor, the second factor number of times. The second factor would be the one that I didn't circle. When multiplying by a negative, report the opposite of the product you normally would. So you end up doing the opposite of what you normally would do. So for 3 times 3, I just go 3 times and I get 9. Negative 4 times 2, I do negative 2 4 times, and I report the answer as negative 8. Negative 3 times 2, I'm going to undo 2 3 times. So instead of doing a regular 2, I'm going to do an opposite 2 3 times, and that gets me at negative 6. Then negative 2 times negative 2, I'm going to do a negative 2. I'm going to undo a negative 2 2 times. So the opposite of doing a negative 2 would be to do a positive 2, and I'll do it twice, and I end up getting a 4. Okay, multiplication can be represented several ways. You need to recognize each of these. It can be represented as using the multiplication cross. So 3 times 2. It could be represented with a dot, the multiplication dot. That's 3 times 2. It can be done with parentheses. That's 3 times 2. The parentheses could be around the other one. 2 times 3 like this, or we could put parentheses around both of them because why not? And the last example here, it does not work for 2 numbers. If I write 2 numbers next to each other, that's 23, not 2 times 3. This is only useful for variables. Like 3 times x could just be written as 3x. 4 times pi can be written as 4 pi. So for things that are not just numbers, like 2, 3, 5, 7, 14, things like pi, x, a, b, c, m, n, any letter, you can represent multiplication just by writing it right next to it. Now the sign rules, if I multiply a positive number times a positive number, I get a positive result. And here's an example of it. If I multiply a negative number, let me do this in a different color. A negative number times a positive number, I get a negative result. And that includes if it's in the other order, negative times positive, I get a negative result. Also, if I multiply a negative times a negative, I get a positive, and here is an example of that. So, don't get confused with this, though. When you multiply 2 negatives, make a positive, but when you add, they just make a bigger negative. For example, negative 4 plus negative 6 versus negative 4 times negative 6. Negative 4 plus negative 6 is going to be negative 10. When you add 2 negatives, you get a bigger negative because they just add together. When you multiply 2 negatives, you multiply as though the signs weren't there, and then you realize there's 2 negatives, so it's going to be a positive answer. And the answer there would just be 24. Okay, the commutative property of multiplication. Basically, when you multiply numbers, you can reorder the factors and produce the same product. 41 times 13 is the same as 13 times 41. The associative property, when multiplying a group of numbers, I can start evaluating anywhere within the expression. So if I do 11 times 5 times 13, if I multiply 5 times 13 first, I will get the same thing as if I multiplied 11 times 5 first. And then the zero property of multiplication. When I multiply by 0, the product is always 0. Okay, that's pretty straightforward. So when you work through these, you just multiply the numbers, ignoring the signs. 3 times 12 is 36. And then you decide if it's positive or negative. Since this is a positive times a negative, it has one negative in it, it's a negative 36. Next one. Negative 4 times 2, I do 4 times 2 and get 8. Then I decide if it's positive or negative. Because there is one negative, it's negative 8. 9 times 6 is 54. Then I need to decide. Negative times negative will be positive, so it is positive 54. That one is done. You also need to be able to substitute in values. So evaluate each expression. Use the value m is 7, n is negative 4, and p is negative 6. So m is 7, so I'm going to replace m with 7. I'm going to multiply that by the opposite of p. P is negative 6, so the opposite of negative 6 is actually positive 6. So this ends up being 7 times 6. Ignore the signs and multiply, you get 42. It is a positive times a positive, so it is just positive 42. Okay, opposite m times n. Opposite m, that's opposite of 7, because m is 7, times n, which is negative 4. Okay, ignore the signs and multiply, you get 28. 4 times 7 is 28. Negative times negative is going to be positive, so it's positive 28. Example 131. N is negative 4, p is negative 6. Okay, ignore the signs and multiply, you get 24. Now negative times negative is positive, so it is positive 24. Okay, example 132. The expression m squared pq is positive. Q is equal to negative 3. What are the possible values for m and p? Now this question is designed to see if you understand what makes an answer positive and what makes an answer negative. An answer is positive if you have an even number of negatives. And it is negative if you have an odd number of negatives. Okay, so with this m squared, that means n times m. M squared pq is m times p times q. Now we're already told that q is going to be a negative number. We need m and p so that we get an even number. Now we do need one more negative. Now if m is positive and p is negative, we get our two negatives, we get a positive answer. Great. This can also happen when m is negative. We get 4 negatives, so we will get a positive answer. We cannot make it work with p being positive. If p is positive, there's no way to get an even number of negatives. Whether or not we put in m as a positive or a negative, we will not get an even number of negatives, so it cannot be positive. So the only thing that has to be true is p is negative. It has to be negative. M can be anything. Okay. All right, and then you'll do your, in this we fill out the table. You will put in the 2 for the t for the first one. The distance above the ground in feet of a skydiver is 300 minus 25t. T represents the time after the parachute opens, measured in seconds. Complete the table. You'll be doing this in your practice as well today. And a little bit more of it will be done. But for the first one, we enter in 2 for t. This is 300 minus, that's 50, which is going to be 250. And then we're going to do 300 minus 25 times 4. 25 times 4 is 100. 300 minus 100 is 200. 300 minus 25 times 5, that's 125. So 300 minus 125 is 175. Then we're going to do 300 minus 25 times 6, that's 150. 300 minus 150 is 150. And then 300 minus 25 times 10 is, that's 300 minus 250. That's going to be 50, and the table's filled in. Okay, and then you've got your practice, and if you have questions with that, of course, you can ask me in class when you get back.